welcome back to EDH Deck Building, and I'm going to talk about what I think is maybe my favorite commander from last year. We got a whole bunch of great commanders last year. Of course, we got the most commanders we've ever gotten last year, and there's one that completely flew under the radar for me that was brought to my attention early this year when I was doing a deck doctor for one of my patrons, and the more I thought about it, the more I was like, man, this is really a fantastic commander that I didn't mention really at all on my channel last year. Certainly, at least I didn't mention it on the best commanders of the year, and I think it certainly is one. That is Lulu Loyal Hollyphant. 3 and a white elephant angel, 3/2 with flying. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on each tapped creature you control, then untap them. And of course, it is a background commander, which means you can choose a background to go with it. I absolutely love this commander with all the different directions you can take with it and all the interesting interactions you can have here because this commander is doing so much. Now, of course, first of all, it's a background commander, so you can match it up with lots of different backgrounds, getting all those different color combinations. And it is a really interesting endeavor to go down the road of looking at all those backgrounds, finding the ones that fit with what this commander is particularly doing. And I've built a couple of decks now, or come up with a couple of ideas anyway, for this commander. And I'm going to throw out a bunch here for you guys to go after. First of all, your commander wants a permanent you control to have left the battlefield. That's the really important part here, right? When you have your commander in play, even the first time you play it, you want that permanent to have left the battlefield in order to get the trigger off your commander. And like I say all the time about commanders, I really want to get that trigger every single turn, right? If you have a commander that is triggering just once on your turn, you want to make sure you get that trigger every turn in order to take advantage of it. So we have to make sure a permanent has left the battlefield. And for that reason, there's a whole bunch of directions you can go with it, right? A lands theme is actually an interesting theme to go with Lulu. And the reason why is because of all those sack lands, like an Evolving Wilds, right? I have Evolving Wilds in play. I can sacrifice it. That is a permanent that has left the battlefield this turn, so that will give me the trigger on my commander. In fact, whatever the Lulu deck is that you are building, putting lands like those Evolving Wilds in your deck, I think is important because it ensures that you get that trigger. Of course, we are in the tapping, untapping theme here as well. Again, you want to take advantage of that ability, and you're only going to do so if you have a bunch of tapped creatures in play. You don't have any tapped creatures, this can trigger and not get you anything at all because it's only going to put counters on your tapped creatures and then untap them. So any sort of tapping theme is a really interesting theme here. Outlast, for example, I'll just throw that idea out there. Outlast is an ability where you are tapping your creatures in order to put a counter on them. So again, fits the +1/+1 counter theme as well. That's an interesting deck. If someone's thinking of going after that Outlast ability, a lot of those creatures are in white. That fits this theme. It fits the +1/+1 counter and the tapping theme as well. Of course, the downside there is you are tapping them only as a sorcery, so you can't use them again. Ideally, I want to use that ability again. So a creature like Scholar of New Horizons, just an auto include in a Lulu deck, in my opinion, again, no matter what direction you're going, is doing the +1/+1 counter theme, but more importantly, has that tap ability. Remove a counter from a permanent you control, search your library for a Plains card, reveal it. If any opponent has more lands than you, you can put that card onto the battlefield, tap. If you don't put that card onto the battlefield, you put it in your hand, then shuffle. So this is a creature that I can tap it down on my turn, remove the counter from it or whatever else I have, right? Obviously, I'm going to have a bunch of creatures with counters on them. It doesn't have to be removed from this creature. And then again, assuming I got that trigger off of my commander, now this will be untapped on my end step, put another counter on it, and then I can use it again, right? On my opponent's turn, whenever, before my turn again, I can now tap it down to go get another land. So any creature like that is extra good. And of course, we're in the +1/+1 counter theme as well. That's a whole bunch of different directions you can go with it. You can do, I'm putting counters on my things, I'm removing counters from my things, I'm just doing a +1/+1 counter theme in general. Again, depending on the matchups you have with each background will depend on which direction you actually want to go with it. Again, there are certain tribes that might actually work here, like Rebels. That is a tribe where there's lots of tapping going on, so you could very easily do a Rebel tribal theme with Lulu. Most of those Rebels are in white, so I can be tapping my Rebels down on my turn. Assuming I get the trigger again, I can now untap them, use them again. Elves even, I know there's lots of great elf commanders out there, but if you're thinking of making an elf tribal deck that has white, because of course, not a lot of great white elf tribal commanders, but if you wanted to go in that direction, you could do a whole lot of tapping down on your turn, especially just with those Manador creatures. And then when we get the trigger, they'll all get untapped and they'll all get put +1/+1 counters on them as well. Obviously, just attacking will also tap down your creatures so that you can untap them and put counters on them on your end step as well. There's a whole lot of tribes that actually fit the theme of what Lulu is doing. But again, having a permanent leave the battlefield is really the important part. The deck list that was sent to me by my patron was actually a treasure token theme, which is a really, really easy theme to do with Lulu, right? When you sacrifice that treasure token, that is a permanent that you control that left the battlefield. So that is going to ensure that you get the trigger. Even if I just have a treasure token in play, I sacrifice it to cast my Lulu. Now on my end step, I have had a permanent leave the battlefield, and I will get the trigger from my commander. There's lots of really interesting directions you can go here. I myself am considering going with a Lulu deck. I talked about this recently in my personal decks video about my Gerard deck, and I had hinted at how I was getting a little tired of that deck, and I didn't really like the entire theme of just blowing up everyone's stuff all the time. It's a little unfun, and I am strongly considering switching my Gerard deck to a Lulu and Guild Artisan deck. Of course, it's going to be red and white. It is making treasure tokens, so I'm getting those treasure tokens to ensure I can trigger my commander. It'll be a little bit more of a treasure token theme, but is still a artifact theme. And again, I will still have Goblin Welder in there, one of my favorite creatures. Don't want to lose that. And of course, Goblin Welder, since it's swapping out artifacts, is going to ensure that I get my trigger off my commander. So it is still the similar theme of artifact recursion and that whole sort of idea. I'm currently working on a deck list for that, so I might be switching out my own Gerard deck. And I actually put another deck together, which I will be throwing out there for you guys if you are interested, and that is a Lulu and Cultist of the Absolute deck. This is a deck that I actually made. The deck list will be in the description for you guys, so obviously it's a white-black deck. And the reason I went with Cultist of the Absolute is because I needed black for one, and also because I was in the sacrifice theme. This is another thing you can do with Lulu, is I'm in a aristocrats style of deck where I want to be sacrificing my creatures because, of course, if I sacrifice a creature, a permanent I control left the battlefield, and I will get the trigger off my commander. Because Cultist of the Absolute says, commander creatures you own get +3/+3 and have flying, death touch, ward, pay 3 life, and at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature. So this is a way to guarantee we're getting the trigger off our commander, I guess, unless we don't have a creature to sacrifice, but in this deck we will. And then on top of it, our commander is now a 6/5 flying, death touch, ward, pay 3 life creature. That's pretty good as well. But why this works particularly good, I think, is because there's a bunch of creatures that are tapping to create token creatures, which works really good in this deck, right? So Thraben Doomsayer, for example, you just tap it to create a 1/1 white human creature token. This will ensure that we have something to sacrifice to our Cultists of the Absolute. So I tap my Thraben Doomsayer, it creates that token, I sacrifice it to my background enchantment, and then of course I've tapped this creature, I've had something leave the battlefield, so on the end step, my Thraben Doomsayer will become untapped, get a counter on it as well, and now I can tap it again. So I'm basically getting double use out of it. Ghoul Caller Gissa is a really interesting one, right? Play a black and tap, sacrifice another creature, create X 2/2 black zombie creature tokens where X is the sacrifice creature's power. So now I can sacrifice any creature I have in play to make a bunch of tokens. Again, we have a creature that is tapping to create tokens, so it's gonna get untapped by our commander on our end step. We can use it again on someone else's turn. Skursdag High Priest is a really interesting one. Tap to untap creatures you control, put a 5/5 black demon creature token with flying onto the battlefield, activate this ability only if a creature died this turn. So again, we're sacrificing a creature, we're going to be able to use it, of course, because a creature has died, and then we tap it and some other creatures. And again, we want to be tapping down our creatures, remember. They're going to get untapped on the end step anyway, so any other creatures that we tap are just going to be getting free counters on themselves, and again, we're creating that token. Bloodline Keeper is another fantastic one. Another creature that is tapping to create a token. So we can tap it, create that 2/2 black vampire creature token if we need sack fodder, and then our commander will untap it on our untap step, put a counter on it, and then we can tap it again to have another one. Skyclave Shadowcat is a great fit here. Fits the sacrifice theme, right? Pay 1 and a black, sacrifice another creature to put a +1/+1 counter on Skyclave Shadowcat. Also though, whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, draw a card. So now we're feeding into the whole +1/+1 counter theme as well, right? Because remember, all of our creatures are getting +1/+1 counters on them. Visara the Dreadful, pretty fantastic fit here. 3 black, 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 legendary creature Gorgon, 5/5 with flying and taps to destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated, so there's a pretty fantastic tap ability that we wouldn't mind using again. We can attack with our Visara. It is a 5/5 flyer, that's not bad. And then on our end step, it gets untapped, gets a counter on it, and then we can use it on an opponent's turn to destroy a creature that's maybe attacking us. Sivrus, Nightmare Speaker, another fantastic fit here, also happens to be a background commander. Tap, sacrifice another creature or an artifact. For each opponent, you mill a card, then return that card from your graveyard to your hand unless that player pays 3 life. So just fantastic value. And again, tapping ability that we can use again. Conductor of Cacophony, 3 and a black, demon, 2/1. Conductor of Cacophony enters the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters on it. So it's doing the +1/+1 counter theme, and we can pay a black, remove a +1/+1 counter from Conductor of Cacophony. It deals 1 damage to each other creature and each player. And remember, we are continually putting counters on our creatures. So this guy, we can keep removing counters to be killing creatures. Maybe we'll kill some ourselves. That's okay. We want our creatures to be leaving the battlefield. And then on the end step, we put some more counters on it. Feign the Broker, amazing fit in this deck, obviously, because it has 3 tapping abilities. We can sacrifice a creature to put 2+1/+1 counters on target creatures. So it's doing the sacrifice theme and the +1/+1 counter theme as well. Remove a counter from a creature we control, which of course is going to be super easy to do because all our creatures are going to have counters on them. And we're going to create a treasure token, which again works really, really nicely with our Lulu. If we don't have a creature to sacrifice, maybe now we can sack that treasure to make sure we get our commander's trigger. And we can also tap it to sacrifice an artifact and create a 2/1 white and black inkling creature token with flying. So again, making sack fodder that we might need. Halo Fountain, again, probably an auto include in any Lulu deck, I think, because you are likely going to be tapping down all your creatures all the time, and Halo Fountain is going to be untapping those creatures. We have a ton of creatures in this deck that we are tapping down that we want to be untapping, so no matter what the situation is, Halo Fountain is probably going to be really handy. It's also making tokens that we can sacrifice. And also Throne of the God Pharaoh, another fantastic include in any Lulu deck, again, because you're likely going to be tapping down all your creatures, and this, just like our Lulu, is an at the beginning of your end step trigger, and you just got to make sure you stack it appropriately, right? Your Lulu wants to resolve last because your Throne of the God Pharaoh is going to look at all the creatures you have in play that are tapped. So on our end step, we got 5 tapped creatures down. We add our Lulu to the stack first and then our Throne of the God Pharaoh. So our Throne of the God Pharaoh resolves first, and it will make all of our opponents lose 5 life, and then all of our creatures will get untapped. Phenomenal include in any Lulu deck, I think. I really like this commander a lot. There's so many different directions you can go with it. It's also an elephant angel. It's got a funny name. I think people like that as well. If you want to go after the deck that I made, again, it's mostly a aristocrats type of theme. That deck list is in the description. Or if you want to go after it for any other reason that I mentioned in this video, you can do that as well. I encourage you to do so. It is a really, really fantastic, interesting commander. I think one of my favorites from last year for sure. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.